welcome to the Church of Perpetual Life. My name is Alex Vidal. I work with the AV team here at Perpetual Life, and I would just like to briefly introduce our officiator, our first speaker. But before I do that, how many people do we have here for the first time tonight? I'd like to recognize you. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Glad to have you. Neil Vandery is, as I stated, our officiator at Perpetual Life. He grew up on the beaches of Venice, Florida. He is both a Gator and a Cane who's now rooting for the Seminoles, believe it or not. He attended law school at the University of Miami and completed a 3-year program at Indiana University to become a certified auctioneer. Mr. Vandery is the father of 7 that range in age from 3 to 33, and his hobbies include scuba diving, learning to fly, and playing games with his children. He is a published author, currently working on several books, and Mr. Vandery also plays the guitar, the piano, and Sirius radio. Okay, so let's welcome, without further ado, Neil Vandery. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay. And let's give a warm welcome to everyone in Russia and the Asian countries that are tuning in today as well. We are live streaming this, and we're also very happy to have Richard from RCP TV doing some professional videography. So it is my pleasure and honor to be your officiator for our church here, the Church of Perpetual Life. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. As a boy, I was raised by a Catholic mother and went to Mass on Sundays, prayed the rosary with the family, the brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts and uncles, mostly aunts, not so many uncles. I talked with my guardian angel every night, and my father did not attend church. He did, however, bring me to a synagogue once. And before he died, he told me that my grandfather was Jewish and that we were related to Anne Frank. A quarter of a century ago, I had the perfect wife. I had awesome children. I had the very best job. In short, it was a wonderful life. I was making more money than ever before, going on trips and getting famous through my occupation as an auctioneer. And it seemed like everything was perfect. I felt like I was in heaven on earth. Do you know that feeling of heaven on earth where everything is perfect? If you can remember back as a child, playing on the beaches or the playgrounds, running through the meadows, running through the woods, no cares, just carelessly, happily living. Everything's timeless, and you were abundantly happy, perhaps. And maybe now you experience these moments of euphoria at certain times in your life or at certain places, these perfect feelings. And this is what I mean by feeling as if I was in heaven on earth, that euphoria you experience from time to time. At this time in my life, back then, I felt that all the time. I was in a perfect state of euphoria. I was in heaven on earth. And then I was diagnosed with a disease for which there was no known cure. And that event changed my life dramatically. I bought all the books on that medical condition so that I could read up about it and learn. I spoke with many different doctors and specialists. I researched online, went to medical libraries, did everything possible to become healthy again. Went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, even talked to a self-proclaimed holistic witch doctor who gave me shots in my fanny. And the most horrible thing that I learned from my research was that I had a very, very high chance of dying from cancer. And so my life took a completely different turn. A whole new direction for me. Money was no longer important. Ego, fame, that all took a back seat to my desire to become healthy once again and to extend my life. I wanted to see my children to grow, and so I wanted to do all the things that I had put off in order to make more money. I wanted to complete my bucket list. And at that time, I was a very, very proud atheist, a member of an atheist club, attending the American Atheists conventions, met Madalyn Murray O'Hair one time in St. Petersburg, and I was very proud and professed my atheism to anyone that was interested, anyone that would listen. And I called my old best friend from high school, my friend Alan Parlin, and he was living the surfing life in Hawaii, which was his dream all his life. And so I got him on the phone, and Alan said, "Man, all you got to do is meditate. Just meditate, man." And so I listened to him, and so I did. And as I meditated, I began to access the ancient wisdom of the universe and learned and relearned many things that I had known before, some things I hadn't known, and relearned things that I had forgotten. As a man of rational, scientific mind, I lost myself at this time in science fiction. Arthur C. Clarke, Asimov, Carl Sagan, Heinlein, Bradbury, I read them all. One particular writer caught my attention when he explained how he changed from an atheist to an agnostic. Somewhere in this universe, he said, somewhere in this universe, there must be a race of intelligent beings who have conquered death, who are immortal, and who have a technology that far surpasses ours, one that would make ours look like the technology of a caveman, that would look to us as if it were magic. And these beings surely would be immortal, possess such powers that would define them as gods. And so this particular man became an agnostic. And I thought about that. And in this vast universe, in the cosmos, with all the stars and all the planets, I do believe there is not only life, but intelligent life. Not only intelligent life, but I certainly believe somewhere out there, there must be beings that are defined as gods, as this particular science fiction writer wrote. And as I opened my mind to the limitless possibilities of the universe, I continued in meditation to still my thoughts. Because at this time, I couldn't sleep. I was awake all night thinking and worrying and wondering, when am I going to die from this disease? How can I avert that? What can I do? Amazingly, the universe responded immediately, abundantly, directly, and personally. Strange things began to happen in my life for which I have no logical explanation. As we entered the new millennia, 2001, I was cured of the disease and became a transhumanist. And that is when I reached for the stars, and my mind and perceptions expanded. Not only did I want perfect health and to be back in that state of mind of euphoria, that state of mind of heaven on earth, I wanted to stay in that condition forever. And I began to seek physical immortality for myself and for my aging father. Through correspondence and readings of Arthur C. Clarke, I discovered that there were two known cryonic groups publicly performing cryonic suspensions. There was Alcor, and I found the Cryonic Institute. For those of you who don't know, cryonics is the science of freezing people to bring back in the future when a cure for their disease can be found. It's quite similar to the extremely low chilling of organs as they are transported across the country to be used as transplants, something we do commonly every day. And the more I learned, the more my life changed. In the spring of 2008, I went to a conference at the Orlando Science Center where I met Dr. Aubrey de Grey. For those of you who don't know him, he's a man with a really long white beard and sort of resembles Methuselah, and is the guru of the current transhumanist movement toward reversing aging. We became instant friends, and I shared with him what my set of skills were and how I wanted to be involved in the worldwide desire, movement, change in order to bring forth the ending of aging, the reversing of aging. Then I joined him at a mega conference that he had at UCLA. In UCLA, they had the End Aging Conference, and this was a first-of-its-kind conference where billionaires and celebrities and famous people and medical researchers from all over the world converged on the campus and rubbed elbows with the laymen and people like myself who would sit in on the conferences, listen to, and absorb some of it. I don't have a scientific background, but I surely appreciated what was going on there at that time. And what brought them together was one thing in common, and that was the desire to cure the diseases and causes of aging. In December of 2012, my friend Aubrey introduced me to a man named Bill Falloon, right up here in Fort Lauderdale. Bill was a fellow immortalist and the creator of a very successful vitamin and supplements company, and he wanted to interview me for a new project that he had in mind. This church of Perpetual Life was a year old in November. We have monthly services for immortalists. We call ourselves immortalists not because we have found a way to become immortal, but because we are working on this, because we desire this, because that is what we are here for. We also have services on Sundays and Saturdays for other congregations. The members of this church, the Perpetual Life, define themselves as Christian, Jewish, atheist. We have Bob of Flesh. We have members who are Buddhist, or Bujus, as Chania says. We have agnostics. We even have, I believe, one Hindu watching online. So hello, my friend, in New York, I believe. We're very happy to be live streaming today. We're very happy to have RCP TV filming today. You can watch our films on our YouTube channel. And I want to let you know that I stand before you now as a very healthy, very happy immortalist, working to bring together all the people around the world that are interested in ending the aging process, in defeating death, and working to create a heaven on earth for everyone, which the great creational forces of the universe, the Creator, intended for all mankind. My name is Neil Vandery. I am a father of 7 and in currently a state of heaven on earth, fully cured from the disease that plagued me and healthfully growing younger each day. Again, it is my pleasure to be your officiator here at Perpetual Life and celebrate our first full year of services. Looking forward to a bright 2015. So at this time we have a little bit of a surprise, and we had a gentleman, Dr. Charles Schultz. Are you prepared? Sure. Come forward, please. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a big surprise to me, and should be for you, because I just found out about a half hour ago that Dr. Charles Schultz is with us tonight, and he has agreed to let us know a little bit about what's going on in his room. Thank you. Big hand.
Well, I don't have anything planned. I didn't write a speech. So this is very extemporaneous. But I've been told that I have the talent of talking interminably about interesting stuff.
I can attest to that, coast to coast. They didn't buy it overnight.
Thank you.
So.
I think my concern is that we spend our lives learning skills, developing talents, creating works, creating connections, and then at the end of it all, where does it go? There's an African proverb that when an old man dies, a library burns to the ground. All of the volumes of experience, everything he's learned, his information, his loves, his hates, his thoughts, all of those seem to vanish. And we have to ask ourselves, is information truly lost? I'm of the opinion that it isn't, and I think a lot of physicists agree as well. I know of some experiments recently which may seem a little off to one side. Quantum mechanics. 2 photons connected to each other by entanglement. They found that even when one of those photons is destroyed, its information can still be recovered from the other photon. Everything in the universe is connected one way or another through quantum mechanics, through physics, through a lot of forces that most of us never study or understand. But the fact is, information is present everywhere, and I do believe that it's preserved. Many people think that cryonics is a good way of preserving their life, and in a sense, yes, it can be. I know that many people are aware of the limitations of cryonics. After all, if you die and are frozen, even if they thaw you, they have to still overcome the initial problem. And many people have a great deal of hope dealing with nanotechnology, for instance, methods of repairing the damage from the freezing and thawing process, Methods of damaging occur just from the formation of ice crystals. There are other things that happen as well. But once that's done, you still have to find a way of resurrecting the dead body itself. Now, we are on the verge of many technologies that appear to be able to suspend or slow the metabolism very successfully. Just recently, we heard of a poison, hydrogen sulfide, which you'd think of as rotten egg gas, being used to successfully create a state of suspended animation in people when they have a medical emergency. They give you a compound that enters your bloodstream very quickly. The hydrogen sulfide molecules bind to the oxygen receptors in the cell, and instead of killing them, they present the cell an opportunity to stop the oxidation process. They lower the temperature of the subject. They can gain now, instead of seconds or minutes, hours to perform a surgical procedure and save that person's life. This is just the beginning of the technologies that are being developed. We are babies. We're just beginning to learn what's possible. But one of the things that stands before me, and this is a church, and I'm going to refer to a biblical quote, we have to put on the incorruptible. Flesh is corruptible. It is a natural form of nanotechnology. It serves us well, it grows, it develops, it keeps us alive. It is what many people think we are, but that's not true. The intellect is not flesh. It's a process. It's information. It's more than simply molecules put together. When we start thinking about extending life, we have to face the fact that flesh is pretty flimsy when it comes to the long term. I don't want to be a 1,000-year-old geriatric patient. I think that the real solution comes when we begin to understand not only how to repair what's wrong with the flesh, but how to transcend it. And I think there are a lot of people who also feel the same way. One of the first steps will be to understand how the cell operates. And then make no mistake, the cell is a machine. It's a machine of exceeding complexity, but we're beginning to make inroads and understand how it works. Everything you are made of, every tissue in your body, every enzyme, everything in there is produced by cells. It is very important that we understand exactly how the cell is coded, how it operates, and what results. A lot of inroads have been made in, for example, stem cell research. Recently, I don't know if many of you have heard, they can take a biopsy of fat cells from you in a hospital. They can treat it with a chemical that converts these fat cells into stem cells. And they're your own tissue, so there is no rejection. This material can then be divided into individual cultures, each culture hit with a different chemical message that determines the destiny of those cells: skin cells, mesenchymal cells, liver cells, muscle tissue, and they can literally 3D print an organ for you. This has been done in a lot of other countries, and there have been real roadblocks to getting it done in the US, but that's starting to change. For the short term, we may be able to create new organs and replace damaged tissues, and even tell our own cells how to do the job. But that's just the beginning. I think if you really examine what's going to happen in the long term, it's going to be a fusion of not only biology and genetics, but also of mechanical systems that can also be made exceedingly subtle and complex. So let's support the people who do this type of creation and thinking. Let's get behind them and make sure that they do the things that we want done. Let's not leave it to some ad hoc committee. Let's put our thoughts and our hearts and our minds into this process. Any idea, no matter how crazy it sounds, could be useful. You never know where a great idea will come from. So, stick with it, think about it, be creative, and have faith. We will solve these issues. Thank you.
Wow. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to share some information, some important information about a historical figure that, an important historical figure that we like to point to at this church. His name is Nikolai Fedorovich Fedorov. Excuse me while I wrestle with these pages here. So, Nikolai Fedorovich Fedorov is regarded as one of Russia's most innovative and original thinkers. Okay, he lived at a time of intense intellectual controversies, artistic creativity, and also scientific takeoff in Russia. Yet it was also a time of growing worldwide militarism, when increasingly lethal weapons were being developed, also of civic strife and labor unrest in the rapidly industrializing countries of the West, and of revolutionary rumblings in Russia. Now, Fedorov was deeply distressed by this state of discord and lack of brotherly feeling, which was bringing so much misery to the common people. How could brotherhood be achieved? Would it be possible to divert human energies from wars and dissension towards measures for protecting mankind against natural disasters such as floods, droughts, earthquakes, hurricanes, and to transform nature from a temporary enemy into an eternal friend? Fedorov believed that if the causes of disunity, discord, and war were elucidated and a common purpose found to divert human energies away from dissensions towards a common goal of overwhelming importance to all human beings, it would fire their imaginations, enlist all their energies, and bring about universal cooperation. This goal of concern to all was nothing less than to rationalize the blind forces of nature which bring famine, disease, and death. And since death is a natural phenomenon, it too could and should be overcome by knowledge and action. Now, Fedorov proclaimed that man is an active creature and will always act. If man does not know what to do, he will do what he should not do. Man will cease doing what he should not do only when he knows what to do. Man will give his energies to a cause when he regards it as duty. And mankind will stop fighting when enough of society acknowledges it as possible and therefore obligatory to redirect energies now squandered on wars and relentless bickering towards the act of universal salvation. This duty, this common task, this universally accepted project was to regulate the forces of nature in order to defeat death. Now, Fedorov's views were based on his faith in science and human reason. Fedorov, who was a deeply religious man, believed the world had been created by God for some purpose, and that man, endowed with reason and consciousness, had a divine mission to accomplish. The spectacular advances of modern science, such as the landing of men on the moon, nanotechnology, genetic engineering, and so on, make many ideas put forward by Fedorov in the 19th century sound less extravagant than they used to seem to his contemporaries. Indeed, it is increasingly felt that humanity is taking over from nature the course of evolution and the fate of the planet Earth. Now, to put Fedorov's prophetic wisdom in perspective, much of the famine that so troubled Fedorov during the 19th century has since been eradicated by improved agriculture technology, despite world population exponentially increasing. Even though Fedorov died in 1903, he interacted with individuals who later became pioneers in conceiving the use of rocket devices to probe space, years before Wilbur and Orville Wright proved that a heavier-than-air craft could even fly, which happened to actually be the 111th anniversary of the Orville plane yesterday. Little footnote there. But anyway, so that's Nikolai Fedorovich Fedorov. You can find more information about him and his philosophies on our website at perpetual.life. But at this time, I would like to actually introduce our next speaker. Back in 1980, few scientists believed that anything could be done to prevent the degenerative effects inflicted by aging. To counter this misconception, Mr. Bill Falloon pointed to then current scientific studies showing that it was possible to prevent some age-related diseases and to slow the aging process itself, at least in animals. He argued that if enough funds were committed to research, therapies to retard human aging could be developed that would result in the greatest revolution in medical history. Few people in 1980 thought that intervention into biological aging was possible, and many questioned why Bill Falloon would want to interfere with nature. But he argued that aging was the greatest scourge afflicting humanity, and that if people had the opportunity to live longer, many of society's problems would disappear. Now, Bill based his philosophical arguments on theories that people with limited lifespans are not particularly motivated to protect society's long-term interests, since they themselves have only a relatively short time to live. Longer lifespans, he asserted, would result in people behaving in a manner that would make the world a better place, since they themselves would have to exist in an environment that they create. So, without any further ado, let's all give a warm welcome to the founder of this church, Mr. Bill Falloon.
I'm going to thank Alex for those kind words. As most of you know, this church was established for the purpose of uniting like-minded individuals into an organization that teaches scientific rationality and will accelerate the Creator's plan for mankind to develop technologies that will facilitate the transformation of life into an environment of perpetual abundance. This particular service tonight is annual. It's very unique. It's called the Remembrance of the Resurrectables. These are people who have already been cryopreserved for the purpose of future reanimation. But what's interesting is that Nikolai Fedorov, he extended his expectation of mankind far beyond merely defeating disease, aging, and death for the living. He also mandated it was a duty, one of these common duties of mankind, to develop technologies that would result in the bodily resurrection of all humans who have ever lived. That's a pretty tall order. But what we're going to talk about tonight are some individuals who have done the impossible. As individuals, they've made accomplishments that enable us to exist today in the state of freedom that we enjoy. I don't know how many of you know a lot about Winston Churchill. What's unfortunate is they did a survey recently in England. Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of England during its most dire days of World War II, and the majority of people alive in England today were unable to recognize Winston Churchill's picture. They couldn't identify who Winston Churchill was. Well, what he was is the person who saved England from Nazi occupation. He saved the world, perhaps, without Churchill. And this is according to a recent article in the Wall Street Journal. Without Churchill, England would have suffered invasion and surrender to the Nazis, and it's unlikely that that would have been an irreversible situation. So we want to pay a little bit of tribute to Winston Churchill and use him as an analogy to someone else we're going to memorialize later on during this service. But we cannot emphasize enough the power that an individual has in changing the world. And when you understand how individuals, singularly, on their own, have made such huge differences, it should empower each and every one of us to realize they can contribute in their own way to accelerating the Creator's plan for universal salvation. What I'm going to do is go to a little slide that I did last year that talked about how people historically viewed the past. They viewed it erroneously. They viewed it as a time of brightly lit rooms, as if lighting had always been around. But what we now know is, and what we've always known, of course, but people forget, is light, electricity, all the conveniences that we enjoy right now, for the most part of mankind's history, they just didn't exist. In fact, in the past, it really looked somewhat a lot darker. You could barely see the figures because candlelight just is not a very good way of disseminating light. And for most of the world, holiday festivities, well, they were nothing. They were dark black. The sun went down and you went to bed because there just was no electricity available to the masses or any form of light that was going to enable them to see anything. So what we'd like to talk about are other technologies that have accelerated in such a way that they're miraculous. These cell phones that we carry that can do more with their computer capacity than what mainframe computers did just 30 or 40 years ago. We talk about the accelerating returns because once this is applied to biology, we too are going to enjoy the benefits that the electrical technology now is giving other people. But when we go back in history, we learn that it's only been a recent phenomenon that we've had the availability of energy to produce the light and the power that we now all enjoy. Oil was not drilled out of the ground until the year 1859. Before that, people couldn't afford oil unless they were very wealthy. It was just too expensive. So most people lived in darkness. They lived without power. Everything had to be done manually because there just wasn't the energy available. And when Edwin Drake proposed that he could drill into the ground and pull out oil, he was ridiculed. That was considered to be an impossible feat. But he persevered. He persevered until he struck oil. And once he did, energy became very cheap for everybody. But of course, everything has a cycle. Cheap energy at some point became scarce energy. If we go back to 1973 with the Arab oil embargo, people had to line up for gasoline. And the experts back in 1973, they were predicting that around the year 2010, the world would run out of oil. This was a consensus of the geologists, the people with the expertise, using all of the data available with the proven and probable oil reserves. They projected we'd run out. The planet would once again become a dark place once the sun set. And there was no one disagreeing with that. Absolutely nobody. But interestingly, some people challenged that. One of those individuals, an individual named George Mitchell, 1993, started to investigate technologies that would enable the removal of oil from the ground that was considered unrecoverable back in those days. And George Mitchell was another individual who was ridiculed. People didn't believe he could do what he set out to accomplish, but he nonetheless persevered. He developed methods to extract oil to the extent that at this date, this year, 2014, looking forward, there will probably never be a shortage of hydrocarbons on this planet. We will be able to pull out of the ground as much as we're going to need until better and cleaner technologies become available. But back in the 1970s, that was considered impossible. In fact, if you've got a group of people together and ask them two implausible scenarios. Which implausible scenario would more likely occur? Scenario number one, will it be possible for cryopreserved human beings to ever be brought back to life? And we're talking about getting a room full of medical experts and other experts together asking that question. Or is it more plausible that we'll figure a way to pull unlimited amounts of hydrocarbons out of the ground? Which unlikely scenario is most likely to happen? Now, I believe the consensus, if that question were posed to several hundred of the most intelligent and enlightened individuals back in the 1970s, they'd say, well, we know the Earth only has so much in the way of hydrocarbon reserves. There's only so much oil that can be recovered. So it's probably more likely that they'll figure a way to revive those cryopreserved individuals than ever be able to pull unlimited amounts of hydrocarbons out of the ground. Well, guess what? They'd be wrong, because they are now pulling out so much oil, there's a surplus, and that surplus is going to continue to increase until this country will be exporting more oil than what it consumes. This chart, by the way, shows what happened when Edwin Drake, back in around 1859, started drilling for oil. There was virtually none coming out of the ground back then. It shot up to a very high level, and then went down, went up a little bit with the Prudhoe Bay discovery and the Alaskan oil pipeline, and then it plummeted. And back around 2008, the world thought it was never going to be able to sustain itself with hydrocarbon energy. And then you see it shooting up, and that's going to continue to shoot up like a rocket. because technology, impossible technology back in the 1970s to conceive of, it was developed, and the impossible has come true. We now have all the oil and all the natural gas we need. So we have a technology that was considered not able to occur. It did occur, and we believe some other technologies in the medical arena are also going to occur. But what we're here tonight is to do is to memorialize not only the one individual I'm going to talk about, but of course all of the individuals who are in a state of cryopreservation. We want to remember these individuals so that we continue to have the motivation to reanimate them. We're talking now about Jerry Leaf. His first life cycle was relatively short. He only lived 50 years, but in those 50 years, he accomplished so much. He transformed the practice of cryopreservation from that of a mortuary environment, which is what was done in the initial phases. He brought it into the medical arena. And in doing so, he brought other people, other medical professionals into the cryopreservation arena. And that has resulted in a dramatically accelerated pace of improvement in the way we cryopreserve individuals. We're no longer using an embalming machine to run glycerol through a patient and hoping we adequately perfuse them to protect against the cryopreservation damage, the low temperature damage. We're using much better technology. Jerry Leaf is the individual who made that happen. He was a thoracic research associate at UCLA Medical Center. He would teach young surgeons how to perform open heart surgery on animals. He would be the one to give them essentially their basic training before they ever put their hands on a human being. So his knowledge on vascular surgery was immense, but he had a greater knowledge or greater need to expand on that knowledge. He wanted to figure out a way to cryopreserve people so that there would be little or no damage. And in doing so, he developed many of the technologies that we take for granted today in the cryonics field. But to give you an idea of what Jerry Leaf did, I want to show you, that's by the way, the capsule bay of Alcor. Jerry Leaf is cryopreserved. He is in one of those capsules right now awaiting future reanimation. But what I want to show you is something that a lot of people might be surprised. Here's a picture of Jerry right now, 2 months before he died. And what he was doing there was helping the very first cryonics individual, Dr. Bedford, who was cryopreserved in 1967, to be transferred to the Alcor suspension bay. Dr. Bedford had set up a trust fund in 1967 to pay for his cryopreservation and long-term maintenance. But there were no cryonics organizations back then, and he didn't know how to set up the trust fund properly. The money ran out. Alcor, being a nonprofit organization, took on Dr. Bedford. He remains cryopreserved at Alcor and will remain there even though there was no funding available. This is a nonprofit initiative. We're not in this to make money. We're here to preserve life. And the best way to preserve life right now is through the cryopreservation process. Jerry Leaf was such a critical part of Alcor, such a critical part that the technology that Alcor has now is largely a result of Jerry Leaf's early work. This is the state of the art of technology when Jerry Leaf became known to me. I'm going to give a little personal message as to my first encounter with Jerry. I was at a cryonics conference back in 1978, and I ran into Jerry Leaf. And I didn't know him, he didn't know me, but I brought him out some pictures of what I had done in South Florida. I set up the first facility in the southeastern United States, as a matter of fact, to cryopreserve individuals. And I showed Jerry some of the photographs of my makeshift laboratory that I set up on my part-time. I worked full-time as an intern embalmer. This was my part-time work. And what we used back in those days was an embalming pump. We would run the circuit through a coil in this garbage bucket to cool down the liquid, and then the patient would go onto this table and we would do a perfusion. But the perfusion we would do would be relatively primitive. We did have the glycerol and DMSO, we had all the chemicals, so we could do a mortuary-based cryopreservation technique. But I didn't know anything at all about real surgery, about the real medical profession. And Jerry Leaf, he spent an inordinate amount of time teaching me, drawing out diagrams and writing up exactly what I had to do to bring my laboratory up to the standards of his laboratory. And I was so impressed that he took his time to teach me what he already knew, what took him years to develop. He wanted to make sure that I understood that. He wanted to share his knowledge with me so that I could do a better job in Florida in cryopreserving individuals. Now that impressed me a lot, because so many people in this world, if they know something, they want to keep it to themselves. They want to make all the money themselves on it. They don't want to give it away. Jerry was not a kind of person who looked at money as something that was very important. He viewed science and progress in technology far more importantly than earning money. So my first encounter with Jerry, it was remarkable, having someone take the amount of time he did to teach me what I needed to do to bring my laboratory up to the standards of his laboratory. This is what Jerry Leaf would do when it came to cryopreservations. It was like open heart surgery. He practiced sterile technique. He introduced all kinds of innovations into the cryopreservation field that enable us now to cryopreserve, inflicting far less damage than what was done in those earlier days with the mortuary practice. And some of the technologies that Jerry developed made their way into the conventional medical field. There is a plasma extender drug called Hextend. It's owned by the Biotime company. It's used to help in surgical situations where a patient needs to extend their plasma so they don't bleed to death. Jerry developed that for cryonics purposes, and it wound up being commercialized by another company. Jerry didn't make any money out of it at all. He just simply wanted to develop this to improve the technology of cryonics. Now that dog you see that Jerry's looking at, that dog at one point was clinically dead. Had no heartbeat, no respiration, no EEG. It was cooled to a very low temperature. And I worked on one of those experiments with a group of people that Jerry sent out here to Florida, a dog that looked very much like that. And we brought the dog's temperature down to about 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The dog was very cold, its muscles were very stiff. There was certainly no heartbeat, no respiration, and no EEG. And I really questioned whether or not that dog was ever going to come back. It appeared to me like many of the deceased individuals that would show up at my mortuary. It was, as far as I was concerned, dead. And we were calling Jerry and saying, we don't think this one's going to come back. It's not succeeding the way your experiments in Southern California work. And Jerry kept giving us instructions on different ways to get that dog back to life. And we were working different shifts, by the way, and after my shift was over, I went home and slept for 3 or 4 hours. And when I came back, I really didn't expect to see a living dog. Well, when I came back, that dog was up and running around and doing everything it did before we put it down. It had the same memory, it behaved the same way, and it was recovered. It was recovered from a period 4 or 5 hours before of being dead. Now that impressed me somewhat, but I already kind of figured that we could do this kind of technology or it would evolve, so I was less impressed than some of the novices that were there who couldn't imagine something that was that dead coming back to life. Now, it wasn't frozen, it was cooled. There is a difference. During freezing, there's some damage right now that we cannot yet recover. But as far as I was concerned with my experience, that dog was dead. But Jerry's perseverance, it was relentless. He kept saying, continue the CPR, continue the rewarming, put in some additional medications, and you might be able to get that dog back. And sure enough, that dog came back. We kept it as a pet, and again, there was no difference from before and after. Again, a flat EEG. There was no brainwave activity. There was no heartbeat, no respiration. The dog was in suspended animation. Now, Jerry did many of these experiments at his private lab in Southern California. And he would bring a lot of people from his UCLA medical team to come out and observe these experiments. And he would then be able to persuade a lot of medical professionals that cryonics had a basis in reality. Because here you had these dogs going down to these very low temperatures, being held at these very low temperatures, and then coming back to life on a routine basis. So that fascination that he was able to create enabled many medical professionals, or I should say motivated many medical professionals to take cryonics seriously for the first time. Because remember, before Jerry, this was a mortuary practice, so it didn't have a lot of credibility. But Jerry gave it that credibility. He was the bridge who took cryonics from a mortuary practice into a scientific medical practice. And that's what makes Jerry worthy of memorializing tonight. We're going to memorialize, of course, all of the individuals who are in cryopreservation, but Jerry, he was special. Very special. And my interactions with him, by the way, were very limited. There's people out there right now listening to me talk thinking, wow, there's so much more I could say about Jerry Leaf because I worked with him in Southern California for 7 to 10 years. And I was only privileged to work with Jerry on a very limited basis. When he would come to Florida, only a few times. And when I would go to California, only a few times. But my memory of him is very fond. And it wasn't just his technological prowess, his willingness to never give up. He was a pillar of strength within Alcor. He held the group together in a magical way, a way that made people feel we're doing something spectacular here. We're evolving this science, the way this church preaches for science to advance, to achieve universal salvation. It was happening with Jerry in a way that had never, ever been done before. And people would not hesitate to join Jerry on his weekend experiments, because Jerry worked Monday through Friday at UCLA. He spent his weekends doing dog experiments, and people were eager to participate because it was just an interesting adventure. We never knew how long we could keep these dogs down, how low their temperature would go, and still get them back. So it was a very interesting time in the era of cryonics research. Jerry, as I said, he's in cryopreservation at this stage, and he awaits our turn now, our turn to develop the technologies that will result in that universal salvation, which includes the bodily resurrection of all humans. Now, it's easy, relatively speaking, to imagine reviving cryopreserved individuals. You see it in the movies all the time. Of course, in reality, it's much more complicated. There's a lot of damage that occurs during the cryopreservation process. We minimize that damage with some of the vitrification technologies that we're using. However, we still need to advance technology much further in order to revive Jerry and all the other people you're going to see mentioned tonight. But the fact is, I was privileged enough to work with Jerry Leaf, and I feel honored that I'm able to describe just a few tidbits of the incredible journey Jerry made in cryonics, where he took it again from a very primitive state, a state that relied on a cooperative funeral director in order to make it happen. He brought it into the medical arena, where we now have dozens of medical doctors and PhDs who are signed up for cryonics. They participate in the research that we're doing now. At this stage, by the way, we have 4 labs on the west coast of the United States actively involved in improving vitrification technology. One laboratory is looking to perfect whole brain cryopreservation. Another group is looking at emergency response capabilities to improve those so we minimize any kind of ischemic damage. We have a number of spectacular research projects going on the west coast of California in laboratories that organizations I'm associated with own free and clear. So this research is going to continue on a perpetual basis. Back in the days of Jerry Leaf, he operated out of a very small industrial park bay. And Jerry would have been so proud to know how far the technology that he pioneered has advanced today. Going back to Churchill, the singular individual who saved Europe from Nazi occupation, the atrocities that would have occurred are beyond comprehension. But one individual stood up for a year and a half before the United States intervened. So we have to pay tribute to other great people who enable us to live with the freedom that we have today to perform the scientific work that needs to be done to achieve universal salvation. And in concluding, we want to talk about our prophet, Nikolai Fedorov. This man was a visionary who may have no equal. He did, as Alex mentioned, he predicted that technology could evolve to eradicate famine. And if anyone looks at a history of famine, that's what killed lots and lots of people for most of mankind's history. It was universal. If the crops didn't grow, if there was a blight, if there was any kind of natural disaster, people went hungry and or they starved to death. And Fedorov says this doesn't have to happen. Technology can evolve to eliminate this common cause of human suffering and death. And that technology has evolved. We have abundant food growing capacity. So much so that there's more food being grown right now than what can be consumed. And I know personally, by the way, I own some farms up in Georgia, and everything that was grown this year pretty much is not even being harvested because so much food has been grown in this country so far. Not too good news for the farmers, I know, but for the humanity, the idea that we can grow enough food to feed the world is a huge technological breakthrough. And it was predicted a little bit over 100 years ago that that would happen. And I'd like to predict that within 100 years, we're going to achieve some remarkable medical accomplishments. So I'm going to thank everyone for attending tonight. We're going to continue this service called the Remembrance of the Resurrectables. Again, we're remembering people who currently aren't able to participate in the good food we're going to enjoy downstairs, and the camaraderie. Those individuals are temporarily out of commission. They're in those capsules that I showed you there at Alcor and the Cryonics Institute, at Cryo-Rus in Russia. There are a number of other, by the way, cryonics facilities being set up, one in Australia, one in Oregon. This is expanding somewhat, but we're seeing more and more people accepting the idea that if we can't achieve perpetual existence today, we might as well take advantage of future technology. And that's what cryonics lets us do. And I've been signed up since I've been about 17 years of age. To me, it was just a rational decision. And I continue to be signed up, and my family is signed up, and many people I know have made arrangements for their bodies to be cryopreserved in the event we fail to achieve the universal salvation in our lifetime.
I want to actually thank all of our speakers. Bill, you're an inspiration to us all. Thank you for that. And so we're going to now go into the remembrance of the resurrectables. These are the people now currently cryopreserved.